Before a boy with a lightning scar became a legend, before a castle in Scotland became the most iconic school in fiction, there was a woman, alone, broke, writing stories on paper napkins in a small cafe in Edinburgh while her baby slept beside her. 12 publishers told her no. The world didn't believe in her, but she kept writing. Not for fame, not for money, but because it was the only light in her darkness. And one day, that light exploded into a magical empire. This is the story of how J.K. Rowling turned rock bottom into platform 9 3/4. Chapter 1. Rock bottom has a basement. There are bad years. And then there's what J.K. Rowling went through. Before she became the first billionaire author in history, Joanne Rowling was living the kind of life no fairy tale would dare to write. She was in her late 20s, newly divorced, unemployed, and raising a daughter alone in a foreign country. She had studied French, taught English, and dreamed of being a writer, but dreams don't pay rent. And hers was overdue. She moved back to the UK from Portugal after a short-lived marriage that ended in pain and disappointment. She landed in Edinburgh, Scotland, dragging a suitcase, a baby, and a story, one that would eventually change her life. But at that time, that story was just a whisper in her head, an idea scribbled on napkins, train tickets, and scraps of paper. She had no job, no money, and no support network. She was clinically depressed and at times suicidal. She described herself as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. That wasn't just poetic, it was literal. She was relying on welfare, living in a small flat where heating was a luxury and eating was a strategy. The world outside was moving, glowing, evolving. Hers was shrinking. Day by day, she would walk her baby around the neighborhood just to have somewhere to go. Then she'd enter cafes with a single coffee and stretch her time as long as possible, writing while her daughter Jessica slept in a stroller. Imagine that. You're 28. You studied. You worked. You tried. And still, you've ended up here, with no one believing in you, no one hiring you. And all you've got is this one weird idea about a boy wizard with a scar and some kind of school for magic. Anyone else might have quit, thrown the papers away, tried something more realistic. But not her, because for Joanne Rowling, reality had already failed her. Fantasy was all she had left. Chapter 2. The boy who lived in her mind. Long before the world read about Harry Potter, before wands and horcruxes, before Voldemort even had a face, J.K. Rowling was already living in her own private world of magic. The idea of a boy wizard came to her in 1990 while on a delayed train from Manchester to London. No paper, no pen, just thoughts, vivid, alive, and persistent. For 4 hours, she sat in silence as a universe unraveled in her mind. A boy who didn't know he was special, a school hidden from the Muggle world, owls, spells, a scar, all of it dancing on the edge of her consciousness, desperate to be written down. She became obsessed. The story wouldn't leave her alone. She began scribbling every free second, writing scenes on scraps of paper, backs of receipts, napkins, anything she could find. Her characters weren't fictional to her. They were friends. They were real. She knew their backstories, their fears, their birthdays. She knew exactly how Ron would react to Hermione, how Dumbledore would speak in metaphors, and how Snape was more than he seemed. In her mind, the world was already fully built. She just had to bring it to life, brick by brick, word by word. She didn't write in a luxury office. She wrote in cafes because they were warmer than her flat, because the noise drowned out the self-doubt. She carried a pram in one hand and a pen in the other. Her daughter Jessica slept while the magical world of Hogwarts was born. The Philosopher's Stone wasn't just a manuscript. It was her escape hatch, her rebellion against reality, her proof that she was more than her suffering. But the journey was slow. Years passed, dozens of drafts, rewrites, character overhauls, all without a single yes. She sent the manuscript to publisher after publisher. The rejections came like curses. Too long. Not commercial enough. Children's books don't sell like this. 12 of them. 12 locked doors, each one a blow, but none powerful enough to erase the dream. Finally, Bloomsbury took a chance. A small publisher, a tiny print run, but behind the scenes, something was stirring. The magic was beginning to leak out of the page. The editor's daughter read the first chapter and immediately begged for more. That moment changed everything. What's wild is that none of this was ever guaranteed. Rowling wasn't a literary prodigy. She was a woman with a story that wouldn't let go. And even after the book was accepted, she was told not to quit her job, that it probably wouldn't sell. That JK sounded more neutral than Joanne, so boys might actually read it. And yet, the magic was already alive. Waiting. Chapter 3. From Rejection to Revolution. The moment J.K. Rowling signed with Bloomsbury was not a grand event. No flashbulbs, no champagne, just quiet relief. A foot in the door. What she didn't know yet was that she had just triggered one of the greatest literary revolutions of the modern age. The first print run of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was a mere 500 copies, most of which were sent to libraries. No one saw it coming. At first, sales were modest. The book crept, not soared. But something strange happened. Word spread, not through marketing budgets or influencer campaigns, but through children. They passed it like a secret. A whisper in classrooms, a treasure hidden in backpacks. Parents started noticing their kids weren't just reading, they were devouring, rereading, quoting, dressing up. Suddenly, those first editions were gone. Then came a reprint, and another. By the end of the first year, the demand had become undeniable. And then came Scholastic, the American giant. In 1997, they acquired the U.S. rights for $105,000 after a fierce bidding war. It was a jaw-dropping number for a children's book. Jo and Kathleen Rowling, once unable to afford heating, had just become a millionaire. It was never just about the money. It was about validation. The single mother on welfare, the woman scribbling in cafés with no guarantees, had just rewritten her future. The publishing industry watched in disbelief as the series exploded. 7 books, translated into over 80 languages. A global phenomenon. The literary world had to recalibrate itself. Children's literature wasn't just for bedtime anymore. It was cultural currency. And behind it all, J.K. Rowling remained grounded, fiercely protective of her story. She refused to let the Hollywood machine rewrite it. When Warner Brothers came knocking, she retained creative control. She insisted on British actors, on keeping the soul intact. She wasn't writing books anymore. She was building a legacy. With every sequel, anticipation grew. Midnight releases. Fans dressed in cloaks, wands in hand. Newspapers reported on queues outside bookstores like they were royal coronations. Rowling had tapped into something primal. The hunger for magic, for belonging, for good to triumph over evil. And through it all, she stayed writing. Always chasing the next chapter, the next challenge. Not just for profit, but because it was who she was. Bonus 1. The spell that wasn't on the page. Before the book deals, before the interviews, before the world heard her name, J.K. Rowling would sometimes look at the page and feel nothing. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Her daughter was asleep in the stroller beside her, gently rocked by the occasional breeze sneaking into the cafe. Her fingers hovered over the pen like they had something to say, but they didn't. Not yet. There's a particular silence that visits every creator, a stillness that stretches longer than it should. It's not boredom, not fear. It's closer to grief, like something brilliant wants to be born, but won't come out. Rowling lived inside that silence more than she liked to admit. And it was in that silence, one evening, that she looked out the cafe window and whispered something under her breath. It wasn't a spell. It wasn't a mantra. It was a question. If you knew this mattered to someone someday, would you keep going? No one answered, of course. No wise owl knocked on the glass. No golden light filled the room. But something did happen. She picked up the pen. She wrote just one line, then another, then paused, then crossed them both out, and tried again. It was awful. She hated it. But she kept writing, not because it was good, not because she felt inspired, but because something told her to keep going. Something invisible, ancient, and quiet. A whisper only she could hear. And that's the thing. The most powerful magic she ever knew wasn't in spells or dragons or wands. It was in showing up, writing when it was hard, returning to a story no one had asked for, believing that maybe, just maybe, this silence she was waiting through would echo inside someone else one day. Before she was the world's most successful author, She was just a woman riding through the dark, and that's where her real magic began. Chapter 4. The magic spreads like fire. By the time the third Harry Potter book hit shelves, J.K. Rowling was no longer just an author. She was a force, a name whispered with reverence. The books were no longer growing, they were erupting. Lines for midnight releases wrapped around city blocks. Some fans traveled hundreds of miles just to get a signed copy. And still, Rowling kept her head down. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing the story. Hollywood had finally arrived, and not quietly. Warner Brothers secured the rights to adapt the books into films, and the scale was colossal. But Joanne had a clause in her contract that most writers could only dream of: full creative oversight. It was her world, and she wouldn't let anyone distort it. She insisted the cast be entirely British, the settings true to the books, the soul intact. She didn't care about commercial shortcuts. She cared about loyalty to the characters, to the readers, to the essence of what she created. The first film was released in 2001. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone shattered box office records. Kids who once imagined Hogwarts now saw it come to life. The Great Hall, the moving staircases, Diagon Alley. For millions, it was as if their childhood dreams had become physical places. Rowling watched it unfold, not with ego, but with gratitude and a touch of surreal disbelief. The money followed as expected, not just from ticket sales, but from everything: toys, video games, backpacks, Lego sets, Halloween costumes. Harry Potter had become a brand, a lifestyle. Rowling's name was suddenly listed among the wealthiest women in Britain, surpassing even the Queen at one point. But her spending didn't balloon. She lived comfortably, yes, but extravagance wasn't her language. Generosity was. She began to quietly donate millions to causes close to her heart: single-parent families, children's welfare, multiple sclerosis research. She launched Lumos, her own charity, focused on ending the institutionalization of children worldwide. She never needed to be praised for it. She simply acted. The woman who once needed help from the state was now lifting others out of the same darkness. Despite the chaos around her, interviews, press tours, red carpets, Rowling kept writing. The books continued to deepen, darken, mature. Her audience grew with her. What began as a whimsical tale for children was now exploring death, trauma, identity, power, and sacrifice. It wasn't just storytelling anymore. It was myth-making, and yet, even amid fame of mythic proportions, she remained elusive. Rarely seen, rarely heard. When she did speak, it was precise, thoughtful. Every word mattered. That, too, was part of the magic. Chapter 5. The Weight of a Wand. As the Harry Potter universe grew more colossal, J.K. Rowling began to realize the cost of building something adored by millions. She had once been invisible to the world, writing in cafés unnoticed, living her story in solitude. Now, she was a public figure. Headlines, flashes, interviews, speculations. Fame had pulled her from the shadows and cast her into the spotlight, and the glow wasn't always warm. The pressure to deliver was immense. With every new book, expectations rose. Would it be as good as the last? Could she keep up the magic? Fans devoured theories, hunted clues, and waited with impossible urgency. When Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix was released, it sold millions in just 24 hours. But behind the scenes, Joanne was exhausted. Writing had become a battle, not because the words escaped her, but because the world never left her alone. She was now more than an author. She was a symbol, a billionaire, a mother, a woman carrying the emotional weight of millions of readers who had entrusted her with their childhoods. People wept over Dumbledore, raged over character deaths, sent letters pleading for resurrections. She loved her audience deeply, but their expectations became chains. She wasn't just writing a story anymore. She was managing a legacy. And then came criticism, not from her storytelling, but from being human. Paparazzi stalked her outside her Edinburgh home. Newspapers speculated about her relationships, her health, her parenting. The more she tried to retreat, the more the media chased. Rowling, who had once battled depression in silence, found herself at odds with a new kind of darkness, the invasive hunger of the public eye. She began choosing her moments with surgical precision. Rare interviews, controlled appearances. She built walls not out of arrogance, but self-preservation. And she reminded the world, she was not Harry, nor Hermione, nor Dumbledore. She was Joanne, a writer, a survivor, a woman who needed space to breathe. Through it all, the books kept coming, each one denser, richer, more daring. She didn't bend to pressure, she faced it. The Half-Blood Prince was released with tension and tragedy woven into every page. Deathly Hallows would follow, promising the end. And fans knew, this wasn't just a book series anymore. It was modern mythology. Chapter 6, The Final Spell. The end was near. After more than a decade of casting stories into the minds of millions, J.K. Rowling sat alone in a hotel room in Edinburgh. Rain tapped gently against the window. A single lamp lit the desk. A cup of cold tea sat untouched. And in that silence, she wrote the final sentence of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Her hand trembled. The pen lingered. And then it was done. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. For years, Harry, Hermione, Ron, every spell, every death, every betrayal had been her world. She had built this universe from nothing, brick by brick, wand by wand. And now, she had to let it go. The story was complete. Her story was complete. The weight of it crushed her. She walked to a window overlooking the city. Below, life moved normally. But inside her, everything had changed. She whispered to herself, I did it. But there were no fireworks, no applause. Just the sound of her own breathing and the knowledge that something sacred had ended. The world, however, was not quiet. The release of Deathly Hallows would become a global phenomenon. Midnight queues circled entire blocks. Airports echoed with silence as people devoured the final pages. News anchors cried on live television. Grown adults wept for fictional characters. And children, millions of them, finished the book and realized for the first time what it meant to say goodbye. Rowling watched all this unfold from a distance. She didn't bask in the spotlight. She didn't parade her success. She let the story have its moment. She had always believed that the world didn't need to see the author, only feel the magic. And the magic was everywhere, in bookstores that looked like temples, in fan art that flooded the internet, in tattoos inked with the words, always. She had not only written books, she had shaped a generation, taught them courage, loyalty, empathy. She had turned trauma into triumph, words into weapons, and a little boy with a scar into a global lighthouse for misfits, dreamers, and survivors. And in that quiet hotel room, where the last line was born, she sat again. Not as a billionaire, not as a celebrity, but as Joanne, the girl who once had nothing, the woman who gave the world everything. Bonus Chapter 2, The Cost of Magic. There's a moment after the dream comes true when reality walks back into the room. J.K. Rowling had done the impossible. She had written herself out of poverty, created a global myth, and touched millions of lives. The world didn't just know Harry Potter, they lived in his world. But what do you do when the story is no longer yours? The book signings grew longer, the questions more personal. Fans cried in front of her. Children thanked her. Adults whispered about how her story saved them. It was beautiful, and it was overwhelming. Her inbox filled faster than she could breathe. Everyone wanted a piece of her magic. Publishers, charities, movie studios, toy companies, journalists. Everyone. She tried to stay grounded, to remember that it had all started with a single idea on a delayed train. But how do you hold on to something so pure when everyone else wants to sell it? She missed the silence of the cafe, missed writing without an audience, without a deadline, without stakes. One night, at the peak of it all, she sat in a hotel room after an awards ceremony, surrounded by flowers, fan letters, and designer shoes she didn't remember asking for. And in the middle of it all, she opened her notebook and stared at a blank page. She couldn't write a word, because now the world was watching. And that's the quiet tragedy of success no one talks about, when your dream becomes everyone else's expectation. But she didn't close the notebook. She didn't walk away, because even with all the noise, all the pressure, all the eyes, somewhere inside her, that same whisper still lived, the one that said, keep going. Chapter 7, The Legacy Lives On. Magic did not end with the final page. Years passed, but the world J.K. Rowling created only grew stronger, louder, more alive. Children who once whispered lumos in the dark were now adults shaping their own stories. Some became writers, others teachers, activists, filmmakers, dreamers, and they all carried a piece of her magic with them. Theme parks rose like enchanted kingdoms. Universal Studios turned fantasy into architecture. Families flew across oceans just to walk through Diagon Alley. Kids held interactive wands and cast spells that made windows fog, books fly, and chocolate frogs leap. Grown men cried stepping into Hogwarts for the first time. Magic, it turned out, was real because she had made it real. Universities created courses on her work. Philosophers analyzed Dumbledore's choices. Psychologists studied the therapeutic impact of her characters on children dealing with grief, trauma, or bullying. Harry Potter had become more than a story. It was a language, a moral compass, a refuge, a weapon against the dark. And the fans, oh, the fans. They kept the fire alive. They organized conventions that looked like utopias. They debated timelines, invented spells, rewrote endings. They created fan fiction that rivaled the originals in depth and passion. They met lifelong friends, partners, soulmates through this universe. And for many, Harry Potter didn't end. It evolved with them. It was woven into their identities. But not all magic came without challenge. Rowling faced controversies. Her words, once universally adored, became sources of public division. Some fans felt betrayed, others conflicted, and yet, even amidst the storm, the power of her creation endured. Because no matter the headlines, the books remained. Untouched, untamed, a separate world that belonged, perhaps, more to the readers than the author now. And that was the truest sign of legacy. When something you created stops needing you to live. Rowling, now more a myth than a person to many, stepped back. Not defeated, but transformed. She had become a symbol of what a story could do. How a single voice, starting from rock bottom, could ripple across the world and alter the course of millions of lives. The Boy Who Lived was now a culture, a movement, a timeless, invisible thread connecting strangers in airports, classrooms, bedrooms, libraries. From whispered passwords like, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good," to worn-out wands carried like relics, the magic lived on, not in spells, but in people. In kindness, in resilience, in the unshakable belief that even in the darkest times, light can be found. Chapter 8, Present and Beyond. She is no longer the woman scribbling on napkins in a cafe, nor just the millionaire who redefined children's literature. Today, J.K. Rowling is something more elusive, more controversial, more mythic. She is a figure suspended between genius and debate, inspiration and disapproval. Financially, she reached heights few could dream of. She became the first author to cross the billionaire threshold through storytelling alone, though she reportedly gave away enough money to charities to lose that status, only to regain it later. And while many admired that generosity, it was her words in interviews and on social media that began to define her image in new, complicated ways. In recent years, Rowling became a lightning rod. Her opinions sparked fierce discussions, especially around gender identity and social issues. For some, she became a symbol of free speech, unyielding, direct, unapologetic. For others, she became a source of deep hurt and division. Entire fandoms fractured. Once devoted followers questioned their loyalty. Media outlets published op-eds. Debates raged on Twitter, and the wizarding world found itself facing the shadow of its own creator. And yet, she kept writing. She released new books under a pseudonym. She expanded the Harry Potter universe with screenplays, theme park collaborations, and stage plays. The Fantastic Beasts franchise brought new creatures, new timelines, and new lore into the world. Not all of it was celebrated. Some critics said she had lost touch. Others argued she never should have returned. But millions still showed up, still cared. Because J.K. Rowling, for better or worse, had built something immortal. She rarely appears publicly now. When she does, she chooses carefully. She speaks not to everyone, but to those she believes are listening. There's a quietness around her, a fortress built not of magic, but of legacy, controversy, and reflection. Some wonder if she regrets the path her voice took. Others admire her conviction, but one truth remains clear. No matter the storm, her influence endures. Children still discover her books for the first time. Parents still pass them down. Artists still find their spark inside her chapters. And the world, divided as it may be, still knows her name. J.K. Rowling is no longer just an author. She's a symbol of imagination, of the heights one can reach, of the complexity of being human, of how stories can uplift and entangle, unite and divide, inspire and challenge. And perhaps that's the final lesson she leaves behind, that to leave a mark on the world doesn't mean being perfect. It means daring to create, to speak, and to bear the consequences of being heard.